If someone came and told you their genius plan to make money by letting strangers sleep on air mattresses in their living room, what would your reaction be? You'd probably laugh, right? Or maybe you'd think they were crazy. That's exactly the reaction Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia got when they started Airbnb. What started as a desperate attempt to pay rent turned into one of the most disruptive companies in the world. But the path wasn't smooth or glamorous. In this video, we're diving into the journey of Airbnb from nothing to becoming a multi-billion-dollar company. It's a story full of struggle, creativity, and a whole lot of risk, and it all started with an air mattress and a wild idea. It's 2007 and Brian Chesky is broke. He'd just moved to San Francisco to live with his college friend Joe Gebbia. They were both design school graduates, but their dreams of making it big in the creative world hadn't quite worked out yet. To make matters worse, their landlord had just hit them with a 25% rent hike. Neither of them had the money to cover it. Brian had about $1,000 to his name, and Joe wasn't much better off. They knew they couldn't afford to stay in the apartment unless they came up with something fast. Then, an opportunity appeared. A major design conference was coming to San Francisco, and hotel rooms were completely booked out. Thousands of people were looking for a place to stay, and Brian and Joe had space. It wasn't much, just their living room, but it was something. That's when they came up with a simple but crazy idea. They'd rent out their space to conference attendees. Not a proper guest room though, they didn't even have one. Instead, they dragged out a couple of air mattresses, threw together a basic website called Air Bed and Breakfast, and listed their living room for $80 a night, including breakfast. To their surprise, 3 people booked. A woman from Boston, a father from Utah, and a guy from India all agreed to pay to sleep on air mattresses in someone else's apartment. For a few nights, Brian and Joe were more than just hosts. They became tour guides and even friends to their guests. They showed them around the city, shared meals, and connected on a level that went way beyond the usual hotel experience. It was this connection, this sense of sharing, that planted the first seed of what Airbnb would eventually become. When the conference ended, so did the bookings. The air mattress idea had worked for one weekend, but it wasn't enough to pay the bills long term. That initial excitement quickly turned into a harsh reality. How do you turn this into a real business? They had no idea if people would actually want to stay in strangers' homes on a regular basis. And even if they did, how would they get the word out? How would you in this situation? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons before we get into how Brian and Joe turned things around. So, Brian and Joe pitched their concept to investors, hoping to raise money to improve their website and grow the platform. But almost every investor they spoke to thought the idea was ridiculous. Who's going to trust strangers in their home? They'd ask. This isn't a business, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Brian, Joe, and their third co-founder, Nathan Blecharczyk, Joe's old roommate, who joined to help with the technical side, refused to give up. They kept refining their idea, focusing on events where demand for lodging outstripped hotel supply. South by Southwest in Austin, for example, seemed like a perfect test case. They built a simple website that let locals list their spare rooms, but bookings were slow. The platform was clunky, and most people didn't trust the idea yet. How would they turn this around? By 2008, things were looking grim. The founders were broke, and the company wasn't making money. Desperation was setting in. That's when they came up with a bizarre plan to keep the business afloat. So they created their own cereal. Yes, cereal, capitalizing on the buzz around the US presidential election. That year, they designed limited edition boxes called Obama O's and Cap'n McCain's. They sold them for $40 each, sending them to media outlets and promoting them online. The gimmick worked. The cereal caught people's attention, and they ended up selling $30,000 worth. It was enough to keep the lights on for a little while longer, but more importantly, it showed investors how scrappy and determined they were. One of those investors was Paul Graham, co-founder of Y Combinator, a prestigious startup accelerator. At first, he wasn't sold on the Airbnb idea, but the cereal story changed his mind. They were accepted into Y Combinator and received $20,000 in funding, along with mentorship that would completely change the direction of the company. Paul Graham gave the team one piece of advice that turned everything around: go meet your users. So, Brian and Joe flew to New York City, where most of their early hosts were based. What they found was not pretty. Many of the listings had dark, blurry photos, poorly written descriptions, and incomplete information. It was no wonder people weren't booking. They realized that if Airbnb was going to work, they needed to help their users create listings that people could actually trust. The two of them went door to door, meeting with hosts in person. They brought cameras to take high-quality photos of their homes, helped rewrite descriptions, and offered tips on how to make listings more appealing. This hands-on approach wasn't scalable, but it worked. Hosts started getting more bookings and word began to spread. Once hosts started seeing results, they began telling their friends. The idea of staying in someone's home instead of a hotel wasn't just cheaper, it was more personal and unique. The timing couldn't have been better. The Great Recession had left people looking for cheaper travel options and new ways to make extra money. Airbnb offered both. By 2009, bookings were picking up, and the team raised their first big round of investment, $585,000 from Sequoia Capital. It was a turning point. They used the money to scale the platform, improve the user experience, and expand into new markets. Slowly but surely, Airbnb was becoming a household name. By 2011, Airbnb wasn't just catching on in the US. It was going global, but expanding internationally was no walk in the park. They couldn't just translate their website into a few languages and call it a day. Each country had its own unique challenges, from cultural differences to legal red tape to varying expectations around hospitality. They had to learn how to adapt quickly. It wasn't just about adding more places for people to stay. It was about creating a space where anyone from anywhere could feel welcome. In 2012, Airbnb took things to the next level with a bold shift in how they presented themselves, which still stands today. They launched the Belong Anywhere campaign, which wasn't just a clever tagline, it was a whole new way of looking at travel. The idea was to focus on what makes travel meaningful: connection, exploration, and the feeling of home even when you're far away. It hit a nerve, especially with younger travelers who weren't interested in cookie-cutter hotels. As Airbnb popped up in more cities around the world, not everyone was happy about it. Some cities started to push back, worried that short-term rentals were making housing less affordable or disrupting neighborhoods. Big cities like New York and San Francisco introduced strict regulations to limit how often homes could be rented out. Instead of shying away from the fight, Airbnb dove in. They worked to negotiate with local governments, changed policies to meet regulations, and even rolled out tools to track rentals more transparently. By 2015, Airbnb was valued at over $25 billion, with millions of listings in nearly every corner of the globe. Then came 2020 and everything changed. The COVID-19 pandemic slammed the brakes on global travel, and Airbnb wasn't spared. Almost overnight, bookings dropped off a cliff. To survive, the company had to make tough, painful choices. Nearly 25% of their workforce was let go, and they put ambitious projects like expanding Airbnb experiences on hold. It was a tough pill to swallow, but they decided to strip things down to focus on their core mission, helping people find unique, meaningful places to stay. Oddly enough, the pandemic also brought new opportunities with remote work. Airbnb adapted fast, introducing features for these new digital nomads, like discounts for extended stays and more flexible booking options. It was a shift that helped them recover faster than many other companies in the travel industry. By the end of 2020, Airbnb pulled off something extraordinary. In the middle of a global crisis, they went public with one of the most anticipated IPOs of the decade. Their stock skyrocketed on the first day, proving not just their resilience, but also the staying power of their business model. With over 8 million listings today, Airbnb isn't just a site for vacations anymore. People use it for everything from moving between homes to setting up long-term remote work bases in far-flung locations. And the founders, Brian is still at the helm as CEO, pushing the company forward. Nathan is still deeply involved as the Chief Strategy Officer. Joe stepped away from the daily operations in 2022 to focus on other exciting projects that you can learn about on his social media. If you've ever thought about starting something but felt like the odds were against you, take a page from Airbnb's playbook. Start small, solve a problem, and don't be afraid to look ridiculous along the way. After all, some of the craziest ideas turn out to be the most successful. Have you used Airbnb yourself? What do you think about the company? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.